I was thinking about it, and I was looking for some clothes to wear, and I realised that this shirt, which I was planning on wearing, was a bit scrunched up, and it had just come out of the wash. So I thought I'd better iron it. So I started ironing it, and when you're an inexperienced ironer, sometimes you forget exactly where the iron's positioned, and I was doing one thing and I had the iron here, and I reached across and the top of the iron scraped me under here, so I've got this nice burn. So I hope you're all, if things go pear-shaped this morning, there's a bit of a reason. So I hope you're all suitably sympathetic towards me now, and I've got you on side. But in all seriousness, thank you, Mark, for the opportunity to share this morning. This is your platform, and I don't take that lightly. So I want to tell you about a phone call I made many, many years ago. I was a young man keen to develop my public speaking skills. My father-in-law, Graham, had been encouraging me to join Rostrum, a public speaking club he belonged to. Graham was one of the nicest people you would ever meet, and he was the reason that I wanted to get involved in this public speaking. He himself was an excellent speaker, but more than that, he, as I said, was one of the most polite, proper, gracious men you could ever meet. Just a lovely man. So I'd agreed to go to my first meeting at Rostrum, but on the day I got cold feet. And out of courtesy to Graham, I rang him to explain I wouldn't be joining Rostrum after all. There was a pause. And then Graham, this incredibly kind and polite man, said one word: go. And he hung up. Now, if you knew this man, you would just not believe it, but it's true. One word, go, and then he hung up. I stood there holding the phone, stunned. Graham didn't lecture me, he didn't guilt me, he didn't even give me reasons. He just said go, and trusted I'd figure it out from there. That one-word conversation has stayed with me for decades, because it wasn't just about public speaking, it was about what happens when someone you trust simply says, step forward, don't overthink it, just go. This morning I want to look at Genesis 12, where God does exactly that with a man named Abram. No long explanation, no detailed roadmap, just a clear, disruptive, life-changing call to go. The Lord had said to Abraham, go from your country, your people and your father's household to the land I will show you. That's Genesis 12:1. Notice what's missing. God doesn't give Abram a map. He doesn't tell him the address. He doesn't even give him a timeline. Just go, I'll show you when you get there. And somehow, in a way that still astonishes me, Abram went. Because here's what I've learned. Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about taking the next step. And when you can't see the whole road, Now let's talk about what this passage reveals about God's character. God initiates, he speaks first. Abram isn't out there searching for a divine purpose. God comes to him and issues a call. That's grace. God doesn't wait for us to get our act together. He meets us where we are and invites us into something bigger than ourselves. But notice the nature of the call. Go to the land I will show you. God asks for trust before he gives details. He invites Abram into a relationship defined not by certainty, but by obedience. It's almost as if God is saying, I want you to know me, not just know about the destination. And this isn't just about Abram. This is the same God who centuries later would call fishermen away from their nets with two words: follow me. Jesus didn't hand Peter a ministry plan or a 3-year itinerary. He just said, come with me, trust me, I'll show you. The call of Jesus echoes the call of Genesis 12. It's personal, it's disruptive, and it requires movement before clarity. So what did Abram do? Verse 4 says, so Abram went as the Lord had told him. He packed up, he left Haran, a place of comfort, familiarity, security. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all their possessions, and he started walking toward a promise he couldn't yet see. Think about what that meant. Haran was home. It was where his father had settled. It was known. predictable, safe. And God asks us to leave it all. Asked him to leave it all. And here's what strikes me. Abram wasn't perfect. Later in this story, we'll see him lie, doubt, take matters into his own hands. But in this moment, he chose obedience over certainty. He chose movement over paralysis. He chose trust. Look at verse 7. When Abram arrives in Canaan, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." God shows up after the obedience, not before. The revelation comes on the road, not in the planning stage. And then Abram does something quite beautiful. He builds an altar. He worships. Even in the middle of the unknown, he stops to acknowledge God's presence. He doesn't wait until everything makes sense. He worships in the journey. That's faith, not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward anyway, with worship as your companion. Now, you might be thinking, wait, I thought we were talking about Abraham, not Abram. Here's why that matters. Later in Genesis 17, God changes Abram's name to Abraham. It's not just a rebrand, it's a covenant moment. Abram means exalted father, but Abraham means father of many nations. God doesn't just call us out, he calls us into something, into a new identity, into a purpose larger than we could have imagined. The name change is God saying, I'm not just asking you to leave something behind, I'm inviting you into a future defined by my promise, not your past. And that's true for us too. When we step out in faith, God doesn't just move us geographically or circumstantially. He reshapes our identity. He defines who we are in light of who he is. Let me tell you how I know this isn't just theory. I started university studying psychology. I thought I had it figured out. I wanted to be a sports psychologist. I was sports crazy. A clear path, respectable career, a stable future. But somewhere along the way, life took a turn. I ended up working in grocery sales. Not exactly what I'd planned. I had this image of salespeople, of people who had chunky chains and big rings and all that sort of stuff. So it was quite bizarre to end up going into Coles stores and Woolworths stores selling Mortein fly spray. Then one day I heard Genesis 12:1 preached, and it was like God reaching through the centuries and tapped me on the shoulder. Go, I'll show you. I felt this unmistakable pull to do missionary work in a developing country. But I said no. I couldn't see how it would work. It didn't make sense with where I was in life, so I pushed it aside and kept going. 9 years later, I found myself working with Opportunity International in developing countries. The very thing God had called me to all those years before. A different path than I'd imagined. Different timeline, but there it was. God had brought me to the place he'd been pointing me toward all along. Here's what that taught me. God keeps working when we say no. Even when we miss the moment, even when we take the long way around, he doesn't give up on his call. He's patient, he's persistent, and somehow in his grace, he gets us where we need to be, often in spite of ourselves. But getting there wasn't straightforward. Before Opportunity International, there was a season of unemployment. Sitting at our kitchen table, father to 2 young kids, staring at an uncertain future, no job, no clear next step, just trust, or at least the attempt to trust. And then seemingly out of nowhere, I landed this great job with Opportunity International, a role that brought together everything God had been shaping in me over the years. I didn't see it coming, but God did. A few years later, well actually many years later, my daughter finished her VCE. We celebrated over coffee, proud, relieved, hopeful about what was ahead for her. 1 year later, she was in the middle of a mental health crisis. Everything we thought we knew about her future suddenly felt fragile and uncertain. And once again, I found myself back at Genesis 12:1. Go to the land I will show you, not the land you planned, not the land you can control, the land I will show you. Trust me. Here's what I've learned through all of this. God's call doesn't immunise us from hardship. It doesn't mean everything will go according to plan. But it does mean we're never walking alone. And it means that even in the detours, even in the waiting, even in the crisis, God is still at work, still faithful, still leading. So let me ask you, where is God calling you to step out in faith right now? Maybe it's a new job, a difficult conversation, a shift in how you've been living. Maybe it's saying yes to something that feels too big or letting go of something that feels too safe. Maybe you're sitting at your own kitchen table, wondering how the pieces are going to come together. Or maybe you're in a season like I was with my daughter, watching someone you love walk through the darkness, unable to fix it, only able to trust. Or maybe, and this is harder to admit, you're like I was all those years ago. You've heard God's call, but you've said no. You've pushed it aside. You think you've missed your chance. Let me tell you, God doesn't give up. He keeps working, and he's more committed to his purposes in your life than you could ever be. Here's what I'd like you to hear. God doesn't ask you to have it all figured out. He just asks you to take the next step, to trust him to move, to worship him even in the uncertainty. Because the God who called Abram out of Haran is the same God who calls us today. And he's not asking us to see the whole road. He's just asking us to walk with him. I've just come back from a week at Sorrento, where our family has had a beach house for 60 years. And it just so happens I turned 60 this past year. My grandparents bought it the year I was born. With the death of my parents over the last few years, it's become impossible to keep the house. 6 siblings, 13 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren, all wanting to use it. You can imagine, it's chaos. So my brother and I, as co-executors of my parents' estate, made the decision to sell. That was completed late last year, and settlement happens in July. We call it Sorrento in our family, not just the house, but Sorrento. Like it's a person, a member of the family, and it's been there in a way, and it has been in a way. It's been there through my entire life, through all the ups and downs, all the seasons, all the joy and grief, and everything in between. It's been the one constant. I've been fortunate to have this place to go to enjoy, to return to all these years. But soon it will be gone. And as I walked along the beach this past week, I found myself thinking about Abram, about what it means to leave the familiar, to say goodbye to what's been home, to step into a future that doesn't include the landmarks you've always counted on. But here's the thing, as much as I've loved Sorrento, it was never meant to be forever. It was a gift, a beautiful, grace-filled gift, but it was always meant to be held loosely. And maybe that's what God is teaching me, still teaching me. Through Genesis 12, that faith isn't about clinging to what's known, it's about trusting that God will meet us in what comes next. And as we step into this new year, many of us are carrying questions about work, relationships, health, purpose. We want clarity, we want guarantees, we want to know the house will always be there. But what if this year isn't about having all the answers? What if it's about learning to trust the one who does? God isn't asking you to be fearless, he's asking you to be faithful. And here's the promise woven into Genesis 12. When you step out in obedience, God meets you on the road. He reveals himself along the way and he transforms you. Not just your circumstances, but your very identity into someone who reflects his purposes. So maybe this year, instead of demanding a roadmap, we say, God, I'll go. Show me as we walk. Maybe we build altars along the way, moments of worship that remind us we're not doing this alone. Maybe we trust that even when we have to let go of what's been constant, God himself remains. Maybe we hear that one word, go, and we trust it's enough. Let me pray. God, you are the one who calls us out and calls us forward. You don't ask us to see the whole road, but you do ask us to trust you with the next step. Give us the courage of Abram to leave what's familiar, to move forward toward your promise, to worship even in the unknown. Help us to hold loosely to what we've treasured, knowing that you are the one constant we can count on. Shape our identity around your purposes, not our plans. And as we step into this new year, help us to walk in faith, knowing that you are with us, leading us, transforming us. Even when we've said no, help us to trust that you keep working, that your call remains, that it's never too late to say yes. In the name of Jesus, who called us to follow him, amen.